Well, good morning. I am glad to see all of you this morning. Were any destruction at anyone's property yesterday? That's wonderful. That is really... Not everyone was as fortunate. Back where we came from in Missouri, there was one little town that... It's not a little town, but... I was a youth pastor there for a number of years, and major destruction that happened there. And then here in Alabama, there's been a lot of destruction, and I just thank the Lord that it didn't have the effect that it had so many years ago here in Tuscaloosa. Everyone have a good spring break? Yes? Some people are still enjoying spring break, I think. I had a great spring break. We took those 4 wonderful children over there and shipped them to their grandparents. And Kara and I went to a hotel and did nothing. It was wonderful. We ate what we wanted to eat. We slept until we wanted to wake up. We went antique shopping. We went grocery shopping. We did what old people do. It was wonderful. This morning, we are in the season of what we call Lenten season. And there is a order of scriptures that you go through during the Lent season. And this morning, we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 13. Just 5 verses this morning, verses 31 through 35. If you will, stand with me. We'll start at verse 31. It says, "At that time, some of the Pharisees came and told him, 'Get out of here. Herod wants to kill you.' And he said to them," that's Jesus that's saying these words, "Go tell that fox, 'Look, I'm driving out demons and performing healings today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day I will complete my work. Yet it is necessary that I travel today, tomorrow, and the next day.'" Look at this. This is so weird. "Because it is not possible for a prophet to perish outside of Jerusalem." We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Then Jesus says here, he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. See, your house is abandoned to you. I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Amen. Give your neighbor a high five and please be seated. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I don't know if anyone here was raised on a farm. Anyone? Yeah, I kind of thought I'd be alone there. Me and Kara, we came from farm country. And we've spent a lot of time around chickens. Maybe you haven't spent time with chickens, but if you go on 15th Street, there is a restaurant called Cookout. Any Cookout people? Yeah. Look at the Burdines. They all stuck their hand up. If you go to Cookout, you're going to see these geese, ducks. I don't know what they are, Wyatt. He's Mr. Biology over here. But these ducks that are walking around the patio, the parking lot, they're in the creek next to the restaurant. And oftentimes you will see a mother that has 5 or 6 little chicks behind it, and they fall in line and follow mama. I dare you to run up to that little line of chickens or ducks or geese or whatever they're called and try to take one of those little chicks. You're going to fear the wrath of the mother if that happens. Kara and I, when we were first married, we lived in a city that had a city park. It was called Kappahaw Park. There was a beautiful pond that I liked to fish in there, and all around that pond, there were big birds, and Wyatt, I don't know if they were geese, ducks, or what they were, but if you got too close to some of their chicks, Mama would be on top of you. Well, this is language that Jesus used in this passage here. He talks about a mother hen who tirelessly watches her chicks and is always ready to protect them. Always standing guard, here's the thing, even when the chicks don't want to come underneath the wings of the mother. Sometimes the mother has to waddle off and get that little chick and get it to follow them. But this hen, her love is unconditional, and despite her best efforts to be a good mama chick or a good mama duck, there's some of the ducks and the chicks that will not follow and obey. There's always chicks that will wander away. They'll resist her call. And Jesus, he uses this maternal picture here to describe his love for Jerusalem. These were his own people that he's talking about here. But his own people would reject him time and time again. Now this morning, I don't want to preach per se. I want to just kind of walk through the narrative here of what's going on. So the context is this morning, that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem where he knows that he's going to be rejected. He knows that he's going to face persecution. He knows that he's going to suffer. And he knows that ultimately it's going to end in death for him in Jerusalem. But this passage that we look at here, these 5 verses, they show that he was relentless in his pursuit. And it shows his pursuit of the lost. It shows his pursuit of his heartbreaking sorrow over those that love him. It shows his sorrow over the city that rejects him. And although we see that Jesus is confronted with political threats in this passage, we see that he has political threats, he has religious opposition going on here. His mission remains unchanged. He doesn't back away. He doesn't change. He presses forward, even though it might mean rejection. Not that it might, that it will mean rejection for Jesus. So, first thing I want to talk to you about this morning is the pressures that Jesus faced. It says in verses 31 and 32, it says, "At that very hour, some Pharisees came to him and said, 'Get out away from here, for Herod wants to kill you.'" Jesus knew that the future held looming danger over everything. He doesn't pull away. He doesn't let the threat of this danger divert his mission. And sometimes in our life, oftentimes in our life, whenever we encounter the slightest amount of opposition, whenever we encounter external pressure, it might be criticism, it might be fear, it might be obstacles that we run up against. It'll push us away from God's calling. But Jesus knows that the path to fulfilling God's will isn't always a smooth path. I think sometimes we think that, when I follow Jesus, it's all going to be wonderful. Can I just tell you as a pastor, it's not? You're going to encounter opposition. You're going to encounter things that will rip your heart out at times. You're going to encounter things that you never thought that you would encounter or experience. You're going to see people do things that you never thought you would see people do. These people that Jesus, they were his people. Even some of his closest followers were going to reject him. We're going to turn him in for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus remained steadfast, and we should too. I want you to look at what Jesus says here, though. It's a very provocative thing that he says. He says to the Pharisees, he says, "Go and tell that fox." It's an interesting way to insult someone, right? I've been insulted way worse than that. Probably this week. People have called me way worse than that. Jesus says, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I finish my course." When I was reading about this passage, I read a lot of different theologians, and the theologians all agree that the idea behind calling someone a fox is a way to describe them as being sneaky or cunning, but weak. A weak ruler. They're sly, they're sneaky, they're cunning, but they're weak. It's a big contrast calling someone a fox that has to do things in secrecy versus calling someone a lion of the tribe of Judah. There's a big difference here. To the Jew, this is what William Barclay says. He says, to the Jew, the fox was a symbol of three things. First, it was regarded as the slyest of animals. Second, it was regarded as the most destructive of animals because the fox would sneak in and take all of your little chicks. It would take your eggs. It would take the things that you were trying to grow. And third, it was a symbol of a worthless and insignificant man. Did you ever see the movie Toy Story? Maybe I can get your attention with that. Toy Story. What was the spaceman in Buzz Lightyear? We might not be able to quote Bible, but we know Buzz Lightyear, doggone it. No. So you've got Buzz Lightyear and Woody talking. And Woody tells Buzz, he says, "You're delusional. You think you can fly. You think you can do all these things." And Buzz looks at him and he says, "You're a sad, strange little man." And that's kind of what Jesus was saying to Herod that day. You're weak. You're a weak man. Jesus responds to Herod's threat here with boldness. And he was very clear in what he said. He says, "You're a fox. You can accomplish nothing, Herod, without being sneaky about it. You're not even man enough to come to me yourself. You're sending people to say things to me." And Jesus, he acknowledges these threats, but these threats do not derail his mission. You see, the fox may plot and it may deceive, but the lion's roar cannot be silenced. And Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He was persistent in his ministry. Despite all these threats, Jesus remained committed to his work. His course was set, his purpose was clear. And he was devoted like an artist that receives criticism over what he's painting. You know, I was reading about this week. How many have heard of the man Van Gogh? The artist Van Gogh. Van Gogh in his lifetime painted over 2,000 works of art. How many of you wish that you had a closet full of Van Gogh paintings right now? Guess how many works of art Van Gogh sold in his lifetime? 1. People criticized Van Gogh for his art. They didn't like the way that he painted. They didn't like the themes that he had. But Van Gogh kept painting. And now we see that it's worth a fortune. But have you ever seen someone that was so dedicated that regardless of what others said, they just kept on track. I think of going to the doctor with my children over the years, and sometimes there's one of them sitting over there, and we won't call names, but very strong. And sometimes the things that the physician had to do to him or her was best for him or her, but that child was not happy to receive the treatment that the doctor tried to perform. One time, Kara and I and the doctor had to wrap him up. I said it was him. Had to wrap that child up in a blanket where he could not get his arms out so that the doctor could do something. Have you ever seen someone resist what was good for them so mightily? It was what was best for the person, but they resisted it. And that's kind of what was going on here. But Jesus was relentless again. That patient, the Jewish people, they were resistant. Jerusalem was resistant. But Jesus' love for his people, it surpassed all opposition that was out there. Here's the purpose that Jesus fulfilled. He says, "Yet it is necessary that I travel today and tomorrow and the next, because it is not possible for a prophet to perish outside of Jerusalem." You think, well, that's crazy. All kinds of prophets were killed outside of Jerusalem. Well, what Jesus is saying here is he's got some sarcasm in his language here. He acknowledges this divine necessity of his journey that he's on here. He acknowledges that it's the will of God for him to go to Jerusalem. And he acknowledges that death wasn't a random act, that Jerusalem was going to be his place of sacrifice. Because what was ordained by God, it can't be stopped, even in the fear, even by the fiercest of storms. Jesus, what he does here is he aligns himself with all of the prophets that had been killed, stoned, or rejected in Jerusalem. And you think, well, who are those prophets? Well, the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Zechariah, the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Uriah, the prophet Micah. Now, not all of them were killed, but they were all either killed or rejected. Their message was rejected. And in a way, he was fulfilling the prophecies of old by calling to the city and calling them to a place of repentance. But he knew that ultimately they would reject him. I'm trying to think of a scenario where, let's say you have a child and they are in war, a soldier, and someone comes to the door with a word from your child that was urgent. Their life depended on it. Someone from the military came to the door, knocked on the door, and you walked to the door, opened the door, and said, "No, thank you," and closed the door in their face. Rejecting their message, rejecting the news that was coming from the important person. That's what Jerusalem did to Jesus. He had news that would free them. He had news that would cause new life for them. But they rejected him. His mission wasn't about popularity. His mission here was not about comfort. Oh my goodness, the American gospel that teaches us about comfort. It needs to be thrown out the window. But what Jesus, his mission was about doing and fulfilling the will of the Father. He knew he would be rejected, but he didn't hesitate. He moved forward. The relentless pursuit of truth doesn't stop because of rejection. It only becomes more resolute. We see a passion here that Jesus felt. He gives this very profound, what we call lament. Grief. He gives this very profound grief here. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. In Jesus' lament here, it's not one of anger, but it's one of sorrow. He feels the weight of the city's rejection on his shoulders. He feels that. His heart aches for those who refuse his love and mercy. And he calls out to them, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Maybe he's calling your name out right now. Joe, Joe, Jay, Jay, Sonny, Sonny. Have you ever seen a child that has rejected the love of a parent? If you've lived very long, you probably have seen it either in your family or someone else's family that's close to you, but a child that will refuse to accept the love of a parent, even when they are offering a gift, the parent, their sorrow is not from a personal offense from the child, but it's from knowing that the child is missing out on something that is life-changing to them. And that's the way that Jesus felt. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft I had wanted to gather you, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. You were not willing. We go back to this image of this hen whose love and protection are always available. But the chicks have to be willing to come. This picture of a hen and her chicks tells us something about what Jesus wanted to do for those who rejected him. It tells us that he wanted to make them safe. I think it's the cutest little thing when all the little chicks run up under the mother who has her wings spread out. You need to go sit at cookout today. Get you a couple corn dogs and watch these ducks. You're going to learn about Jesus here. Get you a milkshake and some corn dogs and watch these ducks go across the creek. But this mother, she'll spread out her wings and these little chicks will run to her. Most of the time. But he wanted to make them safe. He wanted to make them happy. He wanted to make them part of a blessed community. He wanted to promote their growth. He wanted them to know and to experience the warmth of his embrace and his love. But this could only happen if they came to him whenever he called them. There's a theologian by the name of G. Campbell Morgan, and he said that this was a display of the mother heart of God. This was a display of the mother heart of God. You see, whenever you look at the mother hen, and she calls her chicks to come running to her, it's a picture of God, because God's love never forces. It always invites. It never forces, it always invites. And despite his love, the people of Jerusalem rejected him. And I know that this rejection had to sting deeply because he knows what they are giving up by rejecting him. They're forfeiting protection. They're forfeiting peace. They're giving up the life that comes from that embrace. And if you've ever been around, well, we've got some educators in here this morning. You've probably had a student who has rejected what you have tried to teach them before, have ignored everything that you have tried to teach them. It happens very often. I have a person in my life that calls me for advice regularly. and I give them 40, 50 minutes, an hour and a half of advice, and it seems like that person goes and does the exact opposite of what I tell them. Every time. Makes a mess out of every decision that they make. But like a teacher who offers advice and it's rejected, Jesus' offer of life is met with resistance. And that resistance, it breaks his heart because rejection is never easy, especially when it's from those whom he loves. And then we see that Jesus foretells the prophecy. He says, "See, your house is abandoned to you. I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Jesus pronounced judgment on the city that rejected him. In Jerusalem, this city that was once the center of God's activity for man, now is going to face abandonment and desolation because it turned away the only one that could save it. If you read history, you're going to know that in AD 70, the temple was destroyed. Jesus, he promises a day in the future when people will recognize him again. And he knows that his rejection is not the end. He knows that it's not the end. There's hope for restoration whenever they welcome the Messiah. You see, rejection today doesn't erase the promise of tomorrow. Rejection of today doesn't erase the promise of tomorrow. We know that ultimately these people that rejected Jesus will recognize him for who he really was, because they are going to shout in the next week or so, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Haram, if you'll come back. And as mentioned, we're going through this season of Lent right now. And during Lent, it's a time of reflection. It's a time that we're invited to look at the relentless love of Jesus, who pressed forward in the face of rejection. Rejection so bad that it led to the cross. It's a time for us to examine our own hearts and to let God examine our hearts. And respond to his invitation to come. You see, it's good to recognize him as Savior, but to welcome him is what we need to do. We need to welcome him into the places where we need healing. We need to welcome him into the places that we need protection. We need to welcome him into the places that need to be restored in our life. We need to welcome him into our life. And Lent does that. It's an invitation that calls us to this deeper place of our own rejection of God. Friends, we've all rejected him. And just like the people of Jerusalem, how often do we ignore? How often do we reject this embrace that he wants to give? So today I want to challenge you as you're listening to me. I want to challenge you to honestly examine where you've resisted God's love, where you've resisted his protection. Jesus says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem," with anguish in his heart. And that's a reminder that God's love is relentless. Relentless. How often have we mirrored that same rejection that he felt from Jerusalem in our own lives? And we get this 40-day season called Lent. And it calls us to lay aside all the things that keep us from fully submitting to that call to come. It's about taking our hearts that are wandering hearts and aligning our hearts with God's will. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means to face rejection, even when it means to face the cross. So will you come closer to him this morning? Jesus faced rejection, but he didn't stop. His mission kept on. And he is inviting you right now to new life. It's a life where we don't have to live under the shadow of rejection any longer, but we can stand under those wings of mercy. We can stand under those wings of love. We can stand under those wings of grace in our life. And I want you to know that this time of Lent, it's not just about feeling sorrowful over Jesus' rejection, but it's about responding to the invitation that he gives to draw near to him. You see, the cross stands as the ultimate symbol of Jesus' relentless love for you. Death, even death on a cross, which was shameful. So will you in this season choose to come near to Jesus? I pray that you will. I pray that that's what you want. I pray that as I'm speaking to you this morning, that something on the inside of you says, I have to know him. I have to get close to him. I can't live without being close to Jesus. So will you allow him to gather you under the wings this morning? Please bow your heads with me.